The Ottoman Empire controlled the region for about 400 years before its defeat, along with Germany in World War I. Britain was given control of Palestine by the League of Nations in 1920, under an order called the British Mandate. In 1917, the British government signaled its support for the establishment of a Jewish state in Israel with the Balfour Declaration. While the declaration stated support, it also said that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestinian territories, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. Jewish migration from Eastern and Central Europe surged from 1922 to 1947 as Jews fled persecution and the destruction of their communities during the interwar period and during World War II. By the end of the Holocaust, more than 6 million European Jews had been murdered, and many survivors were left stateless. As the number of Jewish immigrants increased, many Palestinians were displaced. They began pushing back, and violence resulted. In 1929, 67 Jews were killed in the Hebron massacre, part of Palestinian riots against Jewish immigration in Palestine. Gaza, also known as the Gaza Strip, is the home to about 2 million Palestinians, many of them displaced after leaving or being driven from Israel during the War of Independence. The West Bank is east of Israel. About 3 million Palestinians live there, most of them Muslim Arabs. The West Bank contains a number of Jewish holy sites, which are visited by thousands of pilgrims every year. Jerusalem itself is a divided, disputed city. It was cut in two after the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Israel controlled the western portion, and Jordan controlled the east. Israel captured the entire city in the 1967 Six-Day War. Though Jerusalem's ownership is disputed, Israeli officials claim it as the undivided capital of Israel. In 2017, the Trump administration moved the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv, a formal recognition of Jerusalem as the capital. However, most nations do not acknowledge Jerusalem as belonging to either Israelis or Palestinians. Hamas is the largest Palestinian militant group and has fired rockets from Gaza at Israeli cities in the fighting. It was founded in 1987 during the first Palestinian uprising against Israeli occupation of Gaza and the West Bank, and has controlled Gaza since winning elections in 2007. It's committed to the destruction of Israel and is considered a terrorist group by the US, the UK, and other nations. The IDF is the combined armed forces of Israel, including the Army, Navy, and Air Force. It was established in 1948, 2 weeks after Israel declared itself a state. In 1947, the UN voted to divide Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states and make Jerusalem an international city. Arabs reject the plan, which is later dropped. After the British Mandate expired on May 14, 1948, the Jewish People's Council met in Tel Aviv and established the State of Israel. The U.S. officially recognized the new nation later that day. The USSR acknowledged it 3 days later. The 1949 Armistice Agreements is a UN-mediated attempt to bring peace to Palestine. Israel signed agreements with Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon to reach a formal peace treaty within 6 months, but the effort ultimately failed. In 1956, Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal and barred Israeli ships from using it and the Straits of Tiran, another shipping route. Israel, aided by Britain and France, invaded Egypt. The Soviet Union, an ally of Egypt, threatened nuclear retaliation, and the U.S. pressured British, French, and Israeli forces to withdraw. The UN deployed a peacekeeping force. In 1964, the Palestine Liberation Organization, a group with the goal of uniting Arab groups and liberating the Palestinian territories through armed struggle, was formed in Egypt. The Six-Day War grew out of the Suez Canal conflict in 1967. Egypt ordered the UN force to leave, closed the Straits of Tiran to Israel again, and planned a secret attack against Israel. In a preemptive strike, Israel attacked Egypt and later Jordan and Syria, capturing Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, and the Sinai Peninsula. The 1973 Yom Kippur War started with Egypt and Syria attacking Israel on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish year. The war was an attempt to reverse the defeat of the 1967 war. Caught unaware, the Israelis counterattacked and won. The U.S. helped secure disengagement agreements from combatants, laying the groundwork for future peace efforts. The 1979 Camp David Accords was an Israeli-Egyptian peace deal set up by President Jimmy Carter and signed by Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem, so Israel began gradual withdrawal from the Sinai that same year. In 1987, Palestinians staged the first of two uprisings in Gaza, Israel, and the West Bank, using mass boycotts, civil disobedience, and attacking Israelis. More than 50 Israeli civilians are killed. The Intifada lasted more than 5 years, ending in September 1993. The Israeli military killed 1,070 Palestinians, including 237 children in retaliation. The U.S. and the UN criticized Israel's use of lethal force. In response to the Intifada, the Madrid Conference, a historical gathering of all participants in the Arab-Israeli conflict, was chaired by the U.S. and Russia in 1991. Oslo I, known as the Declaration of Principles, took place in 1993, signed by Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat. It established a timetable for a Middle East peace process. Oslo II was signed, a second agreement in 1995, in which the Palestine Liberation Organization recognized the State of Israel, and Israel allowed Palestinians limited self-government in Gaza. President Bill Clinton, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat gathered at the Camp David Summit in 2000, a meeting intended to end hostilities but ended without an agreement. Palestinians, frustrated over failures to create a Palestinian state, began the Second Intifada in September, which lasted until February 2005. B'Tselem estimated more than 3,100 Palestinians and nearly 1,000 Israelis were killed. Israel withdrew from Gaza, but retained control in 2005. In 2007, Hamas, the militant Palestinian group, won elections in Gaza. Israel then launched a major military campaign against Hamas in Gaza in 2008, after increased rocket fires from militants. The fighting ended on January 18, 2009, with 1,440 Palestinians and 13 Israelis killed. Israeli forces killed Ahmed Jabari in 2012, a Hamas military chief, in a missile strike. The strike was part of an Israeli operation to eliminate weapons and militants in Gaza. Hamas said the killing opened the gates of hell. In 2014, Hamas kidnapped and killed 3 Israeli teens in the West Bank, igniting the Gaza war, in which rocket attacks and airstrikes killed 2,251 Palestinians and 73 Israelis. A senior Hamas leader praised the kidnapping and said it was intended to spark a new Palestinian uprising. The war lasted 50 days and ended with a truce. A UN report says both sides may have committed war crimes, which Israel and Hamas dispute. The Trump administration in 2017 announced that it would move the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv, in effect an official U.S. recognition of Israel's claim to the city. The embassy was relocated in 2018. Protests broke out on the Gaza-Israeli border as the U.S. Embassy was relocated. Demonstrators threw explosives and rocks across barrier fences and were met with gunfire and tear gas. At least 58 Palestinians were killed. Fighting erupted again in 2021 as Israeli police raided the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem on April 13th, the first night of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, and disconnected speakers broadcasting prayers as Reuven Rivlin, the Israeli president, was speaking at the Western Wall, a site sacred to the Jewish people. Palestinians and Jews began attacking one another, and Israeli police raided the mosque again on May 7th. The raid, on what's considered a holy Muslim site on one of the holiest nights of Ramadan, is viewed by Muslims as an insult. Hamas and other militants fired rockets into Israel from Gaza on May 10th. Israel then counterattacked with airstrikes. A ceasefire went into effect on May 21st. It lasted until June 16th, when Hamas sent incendiary balloons across the Gaza border into Israel. The devices caused 20 ground fires in fields near the border, according to the Israeli Fire Brigade. Hamas launched the devices after Israeli officials permitted ultranationalist demonstrators to march in Jerusalem. In the spring and summer of 2022, Israel experienced a string of terrorist attacks that led it to take what it described as preemptive action. including airstrikes targeting senior commanders and weapons depots, against Iran-backed militant groups such as Islamic Jihad. At least 44 Palestinians, including 15 children, were killed in 3 days of violence in August 2022. In January this year, Israel launched the first of 2 raids against the Jenin refugee camp in the West Bank, where it said Palestinian militants and activists were hiding out. The second raid in July saw Israel send about 1,000 soldiers, backed by drone strikes, to Jenin to demolish what it characterized as a militant command center. In the biggest offensive in years, dozens of gunmen from the Palestinian militant group Hamas infiltrated southern Israel last night in a surprise attack that coincided with a major Jewish holiday. Hamas launched thousands of rockets into Israel. Israel's National Rescue Service said at least dozens of people were killed and hundreds wounded. Thanks for watching.